Today we'll be looking at Unit 4.1, Islamic Empires. We have already looked at the core tenets and foundation of the Islamic faith. We looked at that in Unit 3. So we'll reiterate some of that, but we'll also look at the historical impacts and spread of this religion. So today's key questions were: how are the caliphates run? These political entities, these empires run by a caliph, which would be their head of state, the same way a king would run a kingdom, an emperor would run an empire. And how did they treat the people that they had conquered? And then what were the cultural characteristics of these empires? We'll particularly look at two of the early empires today, the Umayyad and the Abbasid. So as we've talked about previously, Islam will arise in Arabia. This is a desert peninsula in the Middle East. Arabia had historically been a very tribal place, ethnically full of Arabs, people who spoke Arabic, who were nomadic. Again, that's really based on the environment, needing to move around. It's not a good environment for sedentary farming. And by tribal, I mean there'd be small groups, extended family groups. That would be the connection. That would be the government. The political system would be tribal. Trade routes would pass through Mecca. So there was wealth in the Arabian Peninsula, mostly from trade. And some of the Bedouins, these true deep desert nomads, will be part of that group that will convert to Islam as well. So we've talked about Muhammad and how he's kicked out of Mecca, goes to Medina, comes back to Mecca, and he will really establish the first Islamic political entity. He'll be the first caliph, your religious and political ruler. Right? After him, you're going to have what are called succession debates. Succession is who comes next, who rules next. We have this, right, in the United States: president, vice president, speaker of the House, etc. And so their caliph is the name of their political leader. And note, this would be theocratic. There is no attempt to separate the religious from the political. Also, after Muhammad, you start to get this concept of jihad, which means struggle. Today, it continues to be one of the most controversial components of Islam, as people debate what that jihad means, that struggle. Some interpret it as an internal struggle, right? Your spiritual struggle. It could even be your physical struggle. Others say it's a struggle to expand Islam, to fight against the infidels, the non-believers. And that's where the violent elements of this jihad that we often think about with modern fundamentalism. So here you can see a map. Islam will start here in Arabia. It'll make its way out mostly along these trade routes, the same way we talked about the spread of Christianity and Buddhism along the Silk Roads, but also through empire. Again, the way we spoke about the Roman Empire. And in some ways, these aren't two separate things. If you have a strong centralized empire, you're more likely to have extensive trade because people feel protected. And so trade and empire will spread Islam. Note, all the way up here, we'll talk about them stopping. But for a long time, the Iberian Peninsula, which is today Portugal and Spain, will be controlled by a Muslim empire. Generally, the Islamic empires we'll talk about, the Umayyad, the Abbasid, and a lot of the other ones will be tolerant, particularly tolerant of people of the book. If you think back to when we've talked about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and how they share some of the same early history, with Christianity taking it one direction, Islam taking it another. So often Muslims are seen to have felt a connection to those who would also recognize Father Abraham, Moses, Noah, and would see the importance of holy text. And so they particularly would be treated with tolerance within the empire. Another way that the Muslim empires would often deal with diversity is they would just charge a tax. So if you were not going to proclaim yourself publicly Muslim and participate in the Muslim components of government, then you just paid a fine, right? A fee in order to practice your own religion. The first of our major empires is the Umayyad. If you note, it will run from Spain and Portugal completely across North Africa, all of the Middle East, all the way over to India. It's made up of Arabs here in the Arabian Peninsula, those nomadic tribal groups, and then here in North Africa, the nomadic tribal group would be known as the Berbers. They would have been pastoralists, herders, but also nomadic. If you note up here, around 732, we'll have the Battle of Tours. It's fought by a Frankish leader, a guy named Charles Martel, and he will defeat the Umayyad military, and that's why this is the peak. If you look up here at the map, the furthest they will get, Muslim expansion will be stopped here in northern Spain, southern France. And from there on, we'll have several years that this will be the empire, and then slowly the people of Spain and Portugal will push Muslims back out. That will really be accomplished by the year 1492, when all of this peninsula will once again be controlled politically by Christians. The capital of the Umayyad Empire will be here at Damascus, a really important, wealthy trading spot right at the crossroads. It connects to the Mediterranean. It would have connected to those offshoots of the Silk Roads heading this way, trade, trans-Saharan trade, right? So lots of wealth here. And the more people are moving around and trading and coming in contact with other people, the more they're spreading that religion. If you look over here, you see a mosque in Cordoba. Cordoba is in Spain. And again, I think you can really see that Muslim art and architecture reflected in modern Spain today. The Umayyad did have a couple of problems. Some of them are similar problems we saw with the Han and the Rome, just how difficult it is to manage an empire with so much territory. Their economy, right, economic troubles. Particularly what we're going to see is this resentment. If you look back at our map, right here, Arabs are really dominating here, the capital, and here into Arabia, the kind of origin of Islam. And they are going to be the ones running this empire. However, if you look, ethnic groups all over the place. We've talked about the Berbers here, Spanish and Portuguese here. Throughout here, we'll have Persians. And a lot of these groups really felt like they were treated as second-class citizens, and there was a lot of resentment building between those Arabs and non-Arabs. So these are your three core problems. Here you can see another example of Muslim architecture, particularly this geometric tile design in a mosaic and this dome. The Abbasid or Abbasid Caliphate will follow the Umayyad, and they'll overthrow them, particularly this guy Abu al-Abbas. It's very Persian. Remember, if you look back at this slide, we said one of the problems was these non-Arabs. Eventually, one of these non-Arab groups rises up and overthrows the Umayyad. They actually invite them to a party, a lot of the leaders, and basically slaughter them at the party, taking out the leadership of the Umayyad and conquering them. Very brutal. And so this is a more Persian influenced, not just Arab. Its capital will be in Baghdad, modern-day Iraq. It was very diverse and bureaucratic. It was much less dependent on family and nobility of inheritance of ethnicity, the way that Umayyad empire had been. This empire, particularly in part because of this diversity, will see a lot of focus on art and culture and science and math, and they will preserve and translate and build upon those classic and ancient texts, particularly the works of the Greeks. This is all going to be happening at a time when Europe is really rejecting anything they see as non-Christian, including math, science, culture, literature of Greece and Rome. So in some ways, this Abbasid Caliphate society is preserving something that the Europeans are really going to want to bring back around 1400. As we've talked about previously with the Middle East, we see this at a crossroads. So there's massive wealth in the Abbasid. If you look at the map, you can see here with Baghdad, right, at the heart. Note old Tigris and Euphrates, ancient Mesopotamia, but it would be at those centers of crossroads. Note it's smaller. We do not have quite the extent over here. This will continue to be Muslim, but it will be independent of the Abbasid, smaller kingdoms in this direction. Note also you have its neighbor, the Byzantine Empire. This is that Eastern Roman Empire. If we remember, Rome split in the 300s. We will talk about this empire next. So what problems did the Abbasid have? The Abbasid have a lot of corruption. Bureaucratic, meaning government officials who were corrupt, people being bought off, the wealth creating corruption. And within this, particularly factions. Political factions are small groups, right? Like rival groups within the government, and they're fighting each other. As we mentioned, we looked at the previous map, right? A lot of these provinces on the edges will have independence movements. Cordoba, Morocco, Egypt will break off from the Abbasid. And then its neighbors are growing. We, again, looked at the Byzantine Empire on the map. Europe is growing in power. We saw that, right? The Battle of Tours up here. These groups, the Franks, guys like Charlemagne are gaining in power. The Byzantines are gaining in power. And so they have a lot of competitors. All those are going to lead to a really slow decline of the Abbasid, which will last for a really long time, but not necessarily be powerful for all of that. Other groups will emerge. Some of these we will talk more about in the future. Some we will not. The Fatimids will be that Muslim caliphate that emerges in Egypt. We just talked about them getting their independence from the Abbasid. And then we're going to see this group called the Turks. We will talk a lot more about the Turks when we get to the Mongols and other nomadic groups. The Turks are nomadic. They're a language group. They're going to convert to Christianity, or excuse me, they're going to convert to Islam. And we're going to see the Seljuk Turks and the Ottoman Turks become dominant forces in the Middle East in the late Middle Ages. Arab society, we will see it be way more than religion, as we've talked about. Government, laws, culture, art, all of it entwined with religion. A lot of trade. You can see the cities developing, the trade routes developing. This spreads not only the religion, but language, culture, scientific ideas, things like the astrolabe, which is navigational technology. Again, some of your cities, we'll see Baghdad would have been around here along the Tigris and Euphrates. Cairo here in Egypt, Cordoba in Spain, and each of these places we would have seen palaces, mosques, schools, libraries, bazaars being built in that same architectural, artistic style. The most famous piece of literature that will come out of the medieval or Middle Ages period for Islam is Arabian Nights. It's a whole series of stories, including Aladdin and others that have become famous in Western popular culture. Here you can see some of that art and architecture, some unique, this is an African tower. Here you see that same geographic representation, mosaics. It's really important. You'll very rarely see animals or humans, especially humans created in Muslim art. Traditionalist Muslim art would see that as like idolatry, thinking you can create life, animal life, human life, when only Allah can create that. Here you see the Kaaba. This black box is the most holy of sites. It's in Mecca. This is ultimately where Muslims are making their pilgrimage to. It's also the direction when Muslims do their prayer 5 times a day and they're facing Mecca, they are technically facing this holy site. Again, Islamic society, we will see Islam impacting every part of it. The caliphate, the caliph, that religious ruler over the government, Sharia in law, and in society, particularly an increase in patriarchy. The veil predates Islam. It was part of the Arab tradition before Islam came along, but we'll see it become one of the more controversial parts. Again, patriarchy, that male-dominated society. And here you can see lots of the variations of the veil. Over time, we're seeing less tolerance and more discrimination against those non-Muslims throughout the empires as well.